one side and human impacts on the others. That still leaves, there's a lot of uncertainty in what goes into that set. As part one exercise in the process that Tom laid out, Vanessa Schweitzer and Brian O'Neill carried out an expert survey of people working in the impact, adaptation, and vulnerability community. This is a list of variables that got the most number of votes of people being most important to understanding climate impacts. So governance was tied for first place in here. However, although it's good that we have consensus on what matters most, the fact that we have consensus on governance as being something that nothing is more important than is a problem when you compare that to what's available quantitatively. So in the climate change scenarios, you cannot quantify any meaningful governance indicators. So in that high priority list from the earlier slide, the ones on the left up here, you can currently get numerical indicators that characterize these things over time. But these other things, poverty, governance, access to water, innovation capacity, there are no numerical indicators available in plausible futures. So it's as if you were trying to fly your 747 with half the indicator panels taped over. It's not a very responsible way. We're not stuck in this mess because we don't realize that it's a mess. It's actually pretty difficult to carry this out. So this slide is just meant to summarize the proposition that how governance and broader socioeconomic phenomena interact with climate stress to generate patterns of impact, vulnerability, and adaptation is very complicated. The multiple scales interact in different ways. Time frames evolve in ways that are complex. The theories that relate these things one to another tend not to be deterministic. So you have lots of stochasticity in your framework, which makes it really difficult to kind of pin down a numerical pathway that lines up with the scenario. Because it's difficult, and because just empirically, when you look at what's happened in the last 20 years, the community has not put forward quantitative indicators on these dimensions that can be run as scenarios. We've made a judgment that it would be a mistake to have a small group impose a set of indicators and insist that the rest of the world use it. That's somewhat like what happened with the emission scenarios in the earlier generation. This was a very open and inclusive process, but it was premised on a conclusion that if you brought the right people together, you could more or less characterize these things effectively enough that they could support a generation of modeling work. We're saying that that will not happen on these socioeconomic and other governance indicators. So what we have to do is aim for an enabling framework that will permit the generation of quantitative indicators, the carrying out of climate change scenarios in a way that's comparable and human. So the organizing device for that is one of the subcommittees of the joint IAD-IAM committee that Tom heads up. And that committee is very open. So you can go to the website, see what the subcommittees are, find one that you're interested in. If you want to join it, we'll be able to join. One of the first priorities for the groups within that committee was to write a bunch of papers that could communicate to the rest of the world what's underway. So the one that I was involved in was trying to characterize the needs and the pitfalls in bringing quantitative socioeconomic indicators into climate scenarios. So that this paper is currently under review. So I want to talk about two concrete things that the community could do to help. first is probably the most straightforward, which is from a list of high priority conceptual indicators, come up with numerical pathways that identify alternative evolutions that correspond roughly to a continuation of the status quo or an improvement or deterioration, and bounded by a sense of what's plausible as well as what would be useful. So per capita income, which was the socioeconomic variable that tied with governance for being the most important, is one of the exceptions, in that there's a rich history of generating quantitative scenarios of how per capita income at the national level will evolve. But I just want to show you what's currently on the books to give you a flavor of how difficult it is to do this in a way that's useful for the understanding of impacts and adaptation. So up here at the start is the historical trajectory of a measure of cross-national inequality. So this is taking the per capita income in the top 10% countries over the per capita income in the bottom 10% countries, and using that ratio as a proxy for cross-national inequality. These other measures, they all tell roughly the same picture. So the economists at the OECD, when they try to identify pathways of per capita income that are consistent with the 5 SSPs, end up with this set of trajectories. So they all generate a future in which cross-national income inequality disappears. At different rates, but the differences are not as big as the overall pattern. The group at YASA ended up with a set of pathways which is better than that, in that there is at least some variation. And you can find at least one SSP with a per capita income trajectory that at least maintains the current level of cross-national income inequality. But from the purpose of the vulnerability community and the impact community, if the worst scenario you can get is one that keeps the status quo, it drastically limits your ability to ask questions about how climate vulnerability might look under a world in which inequality worsens. So I think we still need to do that. I just wanted to give you a couple flavors of other indicators that might be useful at the national level. This is historical data on trends in democratization over time. The blue line is the number of democracies in the world. The red line is the number of autocracies, and the black line are the countries that are called anocracies. So they're neither strongly democratic nor strongly autocratic. This would be a good candidate for inclusion in scenarios because there's a fair amount of research that shows that how societies respond to climatic stresses of one form or another, droughts, floods, and so on, is mediated very strongly by the type of political regime that's present. The emergence of the famine in Somalia, for example, recently is a clear illustration of this. It emerged there, but it was a failed state, did not emerge elsewhere. This is a graph of the number of refugees and displaced persons over time. Again, very clearly that the more of these people that there are in the world, the higher the level of vulnerability, because these people don't have access to government services, social capital. And then finally, this is the trend